Right. Now, my last video was about Baby L. I've done quite a few on Baby L. I just want to brush up a couple more little things. So I was reading the judge's summing up of Baby F, which was the other insulin poisoning, and the judge said for Baby F, the first insulin poisoning. It's all quotes because none of them happened. Is that the judge says Baby F was the only baby in the unit on that night shift of the 4th and the 5th of August who was receiving TPN. Now, what we didn't get for Baby L was any sort of statement like that about Baby L being the only baby on the shift to be receiving dextrose of any sort from these 10% community bags, as I'll call them. So while they could argue that for baby F, I'm assuming then it's not possible to argue that for Baby L. Otherwise, the prosecution would have mentioned it. And another thing that about Baby L that Ben Myers, her defence, brought up that I glossed over was, okay, they're saying this attempted murder or poisoning happened on what was it, April the 8th to April the 11th off the top of my head, 2016, but the baby didn't actually leave hospital, didn't actually get discharged until June, and so the following 3 months Letby carried on looking after the baby and nursed it to health. I mean, what sort of, if you're trying to kill someone but manage to look after it all the way and nurse the baby to health? It's all ridiculous. I'm gonna come on to I'm going to speak more about the defence's case in a bit. I wanted to talk about, so you've got, basically I want to talk about the jury. So a lot of these arguments that we're making about how preposterous the whole story is, the prosecution's case is, a lot, if not most, and in some cases even more, was actually made by was made by Myers. All of these points were put across to the jury by Myers, and in some cases quite well. I was reading up on the retrial with Baby K. I didn't think Myers did a bad job at all. Calling nurse witnesses and things. So the jury are taking all of this in, and they've not got an understanding of a lot of the medical things. Okay, yeah, they were given pads to explain these medical terms, but I don't know, if you're not medically minded, it might just all be a lot of, as Judith Moritz called it, jargon to you. But on top of that, you've got the statistical element where the prosecution keeps saying, what are the chances? What are the chances? Especially, I made a video, the prosecution's closing statement, it must have been about a dozen times the prosecution asked the question, what are the chances? As if there's some sort of luck element going on, or obviously they showed that that forged hummingbird chart to show Letby is always on shift when Letby's on shift. Surprise, surprise. So I'm actually thinking I've discovered something where now my view on the jury's decision, I think it might have all have been about the numbers and not about anything else. I watched there's this guy, I'm going to give an example. So you know, on fairground rides, when you go to these gypsy fairground rides, the way they make their money is by people's misunderstanding of chance. You know, when they look at cards and they're trying to throw a dart on a and trying to get a dart in an ace of spades or something, and the way these playing cards are spaced, it basically makes it look a lot easier than it is. So they're fooling people by using statistics. And I've got to talk about, there's this guy called Silver Hot Takes, and I'm just going to use him as an example because I think he's actually spoken out about Letby before. I might be wrong, but I think he's expressed doubts over the conviction. But there was something that he was talking about, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use him as an example of an average person. He's got 104,000 followers, and what he was talking about was there was this election, and one of the candidates, one of the independent candidates, got only 50 votes. I think the constituency was only like 3,500 people. So one of the independents got 50 votes, and this candidate apparently ran somewhere else as well, and also got the same number of votes. Now, I mean, the way society works is what has gone before is normally a good indicator as to what will happen in the future. I mean, this is the way supermarkets, this is the way everything, supply and demand, works everywhere. You know, any business will staff their business depending on how many customers they're predicted to get, and the indicators of how many customers you're predicted to get is based on what you got the previous days. In other words, Quick Fit or down the road or whatever are not likely to suddenly have an influx of 1,000 people all wanting the same tyre in one day. What happens is generally they'll stock enough tyres or whatever. Generally they'll sell 3 of those a week, and so that's what they'll stock. And so this independent candidate got 50 votes in this constituency of 3,500, and then I think he moved somewhere else. And what would you expect him to get in another election? My guess would be around 50 votes. And what happened is he got 50 votes, as you would expect. In fact, it was exactly 50 votes for each time. But for me, I would say the odds of that are probably as high as like 50-50. But let's just see. For some reason, this guy, and even as I understand it, the candidate himself or herself, thought there was some sort of foul play involved because of this, and I've just got to
So
play
that
it.
was the setup, and then we run the numbers. Now I run this through, like say, a computational tool and a statistical tool, and I found the answer to be highly remote. In fact, here's how remote it would be: to get 50 votes out of an electorate of 3,500, having specified that you must get 50 votes.
Why do you have to specify 50 votes for like if he got 100 votes the first time and then got 100 again, would that for some reason be a significant factor? I don't know. Would that change anything?
The chances of getting 50 votes are roughly 1 in a trillion.
Right, so this guy's run the numbers, and incidentally, very, very, very few people have criticised him for this. I was looking through the comments, and most people are agreeing that there was something fishy. Now, if people can't grasp, if people think there's something strange about that, what I'm getting to is what must they be thinking about Letby being on shift? Now I sort of understand why this numbers game is so important, due to people's misunderstanding and misinformation. That actually brings me on to another topic. Back in March, the lovely Liz Hull, Northern correspondent, put an article out. Lucy Letby's quote, "misinformed supporters are exacerbating the harm and hurt victims have suffered," furious parents say. And I think there's this consensus among Cheshire Police and Liz Hull that people who question the verdict, I don't really like the term supporters. I mean, I probably wouldn't like Letby in real life. I don't know. I'm never going to meet her. So, but in terms of am I a supporter? Well, I suppose from what they're saying, then okay, yeah, I am. Well, if you want to stick that label on me, okay. So they're saying that we're misinformed, or maybe I'm misinforming everyone else. And I want to say there's a little bit of irony in this, because the reason that I got interested in the case in the first place was because I listened to Liz Hull's award-winning podcast, and what made me do more research was one, when I was listening to it because I couldn't understand how the defendant got into that position in the first place of actually being in the court, because basically I'd listened. I'm not a big crime genre guy, but I had previously listened to, I think it was the Murdoch murders podcast, and they were talking about so this was a series of murders in America, and they were talking about gathering all of this evidence against this Murdoch guy in order to be able to arrest him, because in America it's complete. They actually have to have evidence to arrest you, whereas in the UK you can just arrest someone if you've got reasonable suspicion, which could mean nothing. But in the US it was quite frustrating listening to this podcast where they're just gathering enough evidence to convict someone 10 times over, and they're just gathering all that just to get to the arrest stage. And sort of after having listened to that, you can imagine the juxtaposition that was listening to the Daily Mail trial podcast with Letby. I was sort of confused as to how she ended up in court, and by the end of it, not having heard any evidence, I was confused about the verdict, and that's what actually made me do some more research into it. And so this idea that I'm misinformed or I'm misinforming other people, like it, if you, Liz Hull and Caroline Cheetham, have got some information that you feel should be passed on to us, maybe you could do that, because from what I've heard from the podcast, and I have listened to all of them, and probably twice now, but I'm not, whatever it is you're saying, I'm not hearing it. You know, if you were my original source for information, how am I now being misinformed after having gone and done more research, because what I heard from you guys wasn't enough? That's sort of what I'm getting to. But I also want to talk about some cognitive dissonance that I got from listening to the trial podcast. So I'm on this website here, which will take transcripts from a YouTube video. I basically got the transcripts from the podcast is what I've got here. I've literally picked any at random. This one was quite a long. I think this one was 40 minutes. Usually they're about half an hour, so I've gone for a slightly longer one. And what I wanted to show was one of the things that I picked up in the podcast that was sort of confusing me is they kept saying. So I was waiting all the time to hear some evidence, which never arrived, and they kept using the word evidence, but what they actually meant is they've replaced the word testimony with evidence. So any time that someone was going to give testimony, they say we're going to hear evidence, as if like they're prepping your brain to say what is coming next is going to be evidence against Lucy Letby. Maybe that works on some people. Like I've heard it being used in the media. I think the term is called like a whipsaw, where you will say next we're going to hear a clip from Trump talking about so and so, and you would cite an example, and then the clip that you play had absolutely nothing to do with what you just said, but your brain might interpret that you've just heard some evidence of that. So here I've typed in the word evidence. How many times they use the word evidence in this particular, I just picked one at random. Maybe it wasn't the best example. So it says here, the first one, we'll hear how Lucy Letby allegedly said to a doctor he's not leaving here alive, is he? And how his parents begged for their surviving son to be moved off the unit. And we should just say that some of the evidence in today's episode is distressing. Oh, so there we go. So they're prepping you that we're going to hear some distressing evidence. We never do hear any distressing evidence. We never hear any evidence. Okay, the next one. Arthur's an expert radiologist at Great Ormond Street Hospital, was called by the prosecution and gave evidence. And this was unusual, Dr. Arthur said. Did he give any evidence? I think he gave testimony, but did he give any evidence? Next. After baby P, and she gave evidence that she tried to give him milk via feeding tube in his nose every 2 hours. Did someone provide evidence of that, or did they provide testimony of coming up with that theory? Any more? Here we go. Catherine Percival Calderbank gave evidence that she put Nurse Booth in nursery 2 with Lucy Letby to give her extra support, because again, what she gave was testimony. Another one. I mean, we're 10 minutes into the podcast. Letby commented that baby P was not leaving the Countess alive. Her evidence has been voiced by an actor, so her testimony about what's been going on. Okay, 17 minutes in. They went to see his parents soon after her. After her evidence to the court has been voiced by an actor. So again, so what they're talking about here is testimony again. Any more? Yeah, one more. In the early hours, because the tip of the feeding tube in his stomach had moved, the court also heard blood tests later showed no evidence that he had an infection. Okay, that's just a normal word. Listening to the evidence from the doctors who treated baby P, that he'd changed his mind about what caused his collapse, Mr. Myers. So basically, they keep. She keeps using the word evidence in lieu of testimony, and we didn't hear any evidence. What else is going on in the news? You've got all of these weird, confusing stories where you've got the Telegraph saying Dewey Evans thinks Letby's involved in another death. You've got the Sun in Ireland talking about a lot of letters that Letby's receiving in prison, and the new head on nursing says that they got it wrong on Letby, and they should have. The new head of Nursing and Midwifery Council, Paul Rees, thinks they should have suspended Letby earlier. Well, if they did, perhaps we wouldn't have been in this position in the first place, and it would have been early protection for her. But I think what they're just trying to do is confuse the narrative. I don't know. I think I've got the feeling that the system's going to fight back, double down, frustrate, delay, and I don't think we're going to move anywhere fast. I'm starting to think that. See, what I wanted was full exoneration, so much to the fact that they would have to give her nursing licence back, even. Not that she'd ever work again as a nurse, but now, after seeing the way that the system tries to protect itself, doubling down and confusing, frustrating, I actually don't think we're ever going to get to that stage. Well, not in her lifetime. I mean, I could see in maybe 60 years' time, a bit like the Hillsborough, where apologies will be made to members of her family in the future and things like that. But I don't really have any faith that they're going to remedy the situation anytime soon, based on what I've seen.